It's great to have you. Thank you so much for joining me. I just want to kick off by getting your assessment of where we are today. We're going into an election season. These two candidates have widely divergent views about America's place in the world. How do you see this all panning out?
Yeah. Well, I think we have to start with where we are in the world today.
Yeah.
Where we are in the world today is we have more conflict, and more conflict that is connected than we have had at any time in my lifetime. We have Russia's invasion of Ukraine. They're getting support from Iran and from North Korea. They're getting tech from China. Russia is giving a green light to Iran's attacks against Israel. And we have a pattern here where all of these adversaries see a reluctance in the United States and in the West more broadly to confront any of these challenges. All we hear is emphasis on de-escalation. We don't want this, we don't want that, we don't want that, we have to avoid escalation. That is a green light to countries to go ahead and use force because they feel they can do it with impunity.
The thought process, though, being, when we hear former President Donald Trump on the campaign trail, he says, none of this would be happening if I were still in office.
And what's interesting in that, too, is there's a data point, which is there weren't any new wars when he was president.
Yeah.
And I
so
think
if we're going for a fact check, that's
if we're going for a fact check, you better skip that one.
Yeah.
But the world is much worse than it is now. And you have with Vice President Harris a sense that we should continue in the same direction. We have to avoid World War III by avoiding escalation. Trump's perspective is we have to create uncertainty. We have to make our adversaries worry and wonder what's going to happen.
And it seemed to work for him last time
It seemed to work last time. And what he did, to be fair, is he had very positive signaling towards somebody like Kim Jong-un or Putin or Xi.
Yeah, as in I'm willing to talk to you.
Yeah, but he also put in place some tough policies. And
yes.
With Ukraine, for instance, he lifted the arms embargo on Ukraine. He wanted to sanction Nord Stream 2. He closed down the Russian consulate in San Francisco.
Seems to me like it was real carrot and stick.
Yeah, or at least a willingness to avoid personalizing the conflict with your adversary so that you can talk to them while taking tough policies and creating a lot of unpredictability. And certainly people here in Europe felt that unpredictability. So those are kind of the two models that are out there. Certainly, I would say our adversaries are concerned, or they're reassured by more of the same, and they're concerned about what would happen if it's Trump. Our allies, they're all over the place on this.
Yeah. When you come to a conference like this, and we're surrounded by folks coming from the defense sphere as well as the foreign policy sphere as well, in their kind of correlation, do you see them aligned?
Yes and no. Let's start with the defense crowd.
Yeah.
The defense crowd tends to have a fairly linear view of capability and resources and willingness to use them.
Yeah.
It's like, this is the way things work.
Yes.
And what they get from the foreign policy crowd is a yes, 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 but then no follow-up action. Like, how do you actually do that? Because the foreign policy crowd and the prime minister crowd, they don't want to actually have to spend those resources and get into a conflict.
Right.
So there's a lot of hesitation at the same time.
Right, and then the military crowd obviously wants to go to the defense industry so that they have the tools with which to execute if they're called upon.
Absolutely, and we've seen that we have so degraded our defense industry. We don't have the ability to produce the volume of weapons and ammunition needed in a conflict that Ukraine is having now to defending itself against Russia. Russia's able to produce more, and they're also able to access more, and we are not able to make that up in any space of time.
I think that's an interesting point because there's so much noise right now surrounding the support of Israel, for example, and U.S. weapons to Israel. Obviously, we have U.S. weapons going to Ukraine. Last year, I was at this conference, and I was told by the head of the Canadian fleet that if there were to be a conflict in the South China Sea, some conflict over Taiwan, simply we do not have the tonnage necessary to support any kind of long-term engagement there.
Yeah.
How dangerous is this situation for America?
It's very dangerous. We need our defense industry to be built back up and to have much greater capacity. Someone was talking to me earlier about arms control, saying, oh, how do we get back to arms control? And you get back to arms control by producing arms and making your adversaries wish that they had arms control.
Yeah.
that otherwise, if we're not willing to do it, they have no reason to accept any restraints.
Yes.
So that's the kind of dynamic that we're in now. When it comes to Israel, you mentioned this, I want to come back to it. Israel, just like our adversaries feel that they can act with impunity because there's no threat,
Yeah.
I think Israel feels that it doesn't have any choice. Nobody has their back. They're on their own. So they're having to set the terms of reestablishing deterrence because the U.S. is not doing it.
Yes.
I think we would have been far better off with a more robust supportive policy for Israel last year.
Yes.
And hopefully avoided a lot of the devastation in Gaza and avoided a lot of the escalation of conflict now, because you'd have a more confident Israel and an unwillingness to challenge Israel backed by the United States.
How do you see President Putin's commitment, that 25 to 30% commitment above and beyond what they're already doing now to military spending?
Well, there's two ways to look at it. One, it's a huge commitment as a matter of national priority.
Yeah.
So it's 40% of their state budget is going to go to defense.
It's a war economy. It's a war footing.
That's right. So that's one. On the other hand, it's about $125 billion, which is roughly what the U.S. and EU are spending on aid to Ukraine, and it's a drop in the bucket for us. So it is a commitment, but it's also scale-wise not as big a scale as it sounds like.
Yeah. Does this make the fight for Ukraine more difficult?
The fight for Ukraine shouldn't be that hard. We're making it hard by our own fears. We are governed by our fear of escalation, fear of nuclear weapons, fear of failure of Russia, fragmentation of Russia. Anything we can imagine that we're afraid of, we project onto the Ukraine conflict. Mm-hmm. We should instead look around the world and say, it's bad enough. We shouldn't be worried about those things. We should be worried about the current situation continuing and stopping it. And I think if we were actually willing to provide the weapons, provide the permissions, to start getting serious about NATO membership, getting serious about air defense over NATO territory and adjoining territory, we'd be far better off than we are with the situation today.
Yeah, and of course the fear there is that either candidate will put Ukraine on the back burner. What's your take on that?
Well, I think that Harris is going to be very much a continuation of current trends, which are not sufficient. That Ukraine is not winning. They're not losing, but they're not winning. Putin doesn't feel that he's been stopped in any way. He's determined to keep going. And lots of people have died because it has gone on for so long, and that would all continue. With Trump, I think what he's going to try to do is convince Putin, you have to end the war. Because if you don't, I'm going to unleash everything. And so you better do it now.
Yeah.
And I think that has a better chance of winning as long as Trump means what he would say and saying, I'm ready to push back.
Yes.
Not that I want to, but I'm ready to push back if you don't stop this war.
Yeah. What's your assessment beyond just this election of the fatigue? Because I'm a worst case scenario kind of girl. Because I look at it, frankly, I think of the foreign policy track, I think of the defense track, but I also think of the voters, and I'm talking about the money, how much it costs. And so when they see these big numbers and they're worried about their own, ways to make it ends meet with inflation, this becomes a bigger part of the story. I mean, it's literally about the bottom line.
It is. Everything costs money, but you always have to worry about what it's going to cost if you don't do it. We always calculate in the costs of doing something. We seldom calculate in the costs of not doing something and then what we're going to face later. Yeah. I give the example of Ukraine again. Right now, not a single American soldier is at risk in Ukraine, dying, anything like that. Same with our allies. We're not paying any price in terms of a war, not paying any price in terms of human lives. If Ukraine loses to Russia, Russia's right there on the Polish border with claims on Polish territory, Lithuanian territory, and Estonian territory, we are now at risk.
Yeah.
And we could have Americans die. We could have ourselves in a war defending our allies that we can prevent if we see Ukraine win now.
Tell me this, as a former U.S. ambassador to NATO, we now have a new NATO Secretary General. Mm-hmm. What's your take?
Well, first off, I think Jens Stoltenberg did a phenomenal job. Second, I think the job of Secretary General is often misunderstood. You're not the leader of the alliance. you are the representative of all of the allies where they agree.
Yeah.
So you have to
basically the custodian of that relationship.
Yeah, the custodian of consensus.
Yes.
Try to build consensus, and you can speak on behalf of the alliance when there's consensus. But you're a manager among many, many countries and interests rather than a CEO. So that's the job. The more you do it and the more successful you are, the more leeway you get from the allies. And that's exactly what happened with Stoltenberg, where he gained more and more authority over 10 years.
Yeah.
Rutte is now having to start at the beginning again and reassure everybody that he is going to be a good, reliable custodian of the alliance consensus. And he's going to have a new U.S. administration to work with. He's going to have some changes in European governments as well. He's got a lot of road ahead of him to build that confidence.
Mark Rutte is a person that I have interviewed on a number of occasions. We've talked about energy security. He deeply understands Europe's
He's a very
energy
smart
scenario.
guy. He's a very wonky, technocratic leader.
Yes. And also a good politician, one could argue, which I think you need to be if you're going to be, as you say,
you have to be
corralling
able
all
to
these
work
folks.
with everybody. His biggest weakness is the Netherlands, under his tenure as prime minister, never spent 2% of GDP on defense.
Yeah.
And that's going to be a hard sell to a country like Poland that is inching up to 5% because of the real threats that they're facing right here.
Walk me through those politics then.
Yeah.
That seems a bit off kilter, does it not?
It does, yeah. That he was. How do I want to say this? You have countries in the north and east of Europe that are looking at Russia as a real and growing threat.
Yes.
And they're spending 2, 3, 4, Poland getting close to 5% of GDP on defense.
Yes.
You have countries in Western Europe that say, well, yeah, but we have difficulties. We have budget deficits. We have healthcare. We have education.
And his country is one of those countries.
And his country is one of those countries. So they did not spend 2% of GDP on defense, despite now 12 years from the NATO Wales summit in 2014, where everybody said they would.
Yes.
So
I remember that summit. It was cold.
This is a pretty harsh divide within NATO of those who are spending and those who are not. And it was not viewed very favorably in Central and Eastern Europe that he would even be considered for Secretary General as a result. On the other hand, he has very good relationships with people, as you say, natural politician, gets along well with Germany, France, the United States as well. So he got backing for his 10-year Secretary General. But now he needs to win everybody over.
Yeah.
And I think that's why I pointed out, he still has a road ahead.
Yes.
Jens had that.
Yeah.
He had convinced everybody. But Rutte's going to have to convince people.
Excellent. Talk to me about this one. Okay, so this is a man who understands energy security. That's something that Ukraine, yet again, moving into what could potentially be a really tough winter.
Yeah.
How do you assess NATO's ability, capacity to support them?
Well, NATO's not an energy organization.
Very true.
When you look at energy security, there is an element to which you have to provide physical security for energy production and transmission. And we could be doing things that we're not doing.
Like what?
Air defense. The way Russia knocks out Ukraine's energy grid is through missiles and drone attacks. We could be doing air defense at a minimum, telling Poland and Romania it's okay to defend your own airspace so that Russian missiles and drones don't fly through it anymore. That would be already a step. But if I were Poland and Romania, or if I were in the U.S. administration, I'd be saying that you should have an extended air defense zone so that you don't face a risk of these dangerous objects coming within 100 kilometers or 150 kilometers of your airspace.
Yes.
So that no NATO territory population is going to get hit with anything. And that would benefit you, obviously, protect your people, NATO collective defense, perfectly legitimate. It would be with the permission of Ukraine, so no one should have anything to complain about. And it would have the derivative effect of providing some coverage over Ukrainian territory as well and protecting some of these energy supplies.
Yes.
So that's an example of something NATO could do that it's not doing. And that would help protect energy. But then the other side of energy security is building up energy capacity in Ukraine linking it to the European Union,
Yes.
and cutting off access of Russia to global energy markets. We haven't been serious about this.
No.
We sanction and then we don't implement the sanctions.
Yes.
Other countries are just buying up the Russian oil and gas that Europe's not buying.
And I've noticed that there's a serious trend in the press that's only just now starting to be more realistic to say that these sanctions have worked when we who understand energy markets know that they have not.
No, they have definitely not. In fact, I was in Greece about a month ago, and they were telling me that when people thought sanctions were real, the mix of Russian gas in the Greece gas market was down close to 20%.
Yeah.
Now that people know sanctions are not real, it's back over 60%.
Incredible, incredible. In your mind, what's keeping NATO from doing that low-hanging fruit? Is it just fear?
Fear, yes. Fear. We are governed by our fears, not governed by purpose.
Yes. Kurt, it's great to have you. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Hadley. Good luck.